Tato no mai haere mai. It's wonderful to see so many people here this morning. So give each other a high five for getting out of bed so early and coming. It is going to be a fantastic day. My name is Judy McGregor and I'm the Associate Dean Postgrad in the Faculty of Culture and Society. And it's my very great privilege to welcome you all here. I notice all the boys are sitting down here and all the girls are sitting at the back, but by the end of the day we'll have you all mixed up, I can tell you. Today is the first in the Connect Postgrad week, and on your tables you will find information about what's happening this week. There is various postgrad and research seminars and symposiums and workshops. There's going to be a postgrad research symposium in which Associate Professor Charles Walker, the co-director of CoLab, is going to be running an interesting session. And of course, the great excitement of the 3-minute thesis, which is really like you speed dating with your oral presentations, using one PowerPoint and telling us what you're studying and the intricacies of your thesis in 3 minutes only. So for further information about those events, there is material on the tables, or Annette and all the staff can help you. But this morning, we're delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Lyn Lavery, who is a Director of Academic Consulting. Now, Lyn is well known to many of us in the university sector for her wonderful postgrad training that she gives students, university staff, and government agencies. And Lyn began life as a quantitative researcher, and then saw the light, and is now interested in large-scale qualitative researching. She has an educational psychology PhD and has looked at the motivations and experience of postgrad students. And Lyn, we're really looking forward to hearing from you, because I understand from your publicity material that you're going to teach us how to be masters and mistresses of our own work. And I've always wanted to be a mistress of my own work. So Lyn, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for that, Judy. I had a milestone birthday a couple of weeks ago, hence the baby photo. There was a suggestion in the office that I start my talk today by an audience poll to see if you could figure out which particular milestone it was. I decided that had the potential to go horribly wrong on me, so I'll leave it to your imaginations instead. Now, as with any milestone in life, there is a tendency to look back and perhaps reflect on the things you've achieved, perhaps those you haven't. And this birthday for me was no exception. Looking back for me personally, research is a really big part of my life. And so it was natural to reflect on my postgraduate years and my career as a researcher since then. Hence the topic of my talk today, things I've learned so far. Now, with any journey, the first thing you need to do is decide where you want to go. If you don't have a destination in mind, it's actually going to be really hard to get there. Now, with any research project, your research question determines where you want to go. Now, every good student knows they need to start with a research question. That's Research 101. That's really basic. But a research question isn't actually just your starting point. Your entire journey revolves around that research question. It determines your chosen methodology, it helps focus your literature review, it helps you decide what data you're going to collect. Now, a mistake I made myself, and a mistake that I see other students make, is that they get so engrossed with collecting data and doing the actual writing, they lose sight of the original question. And the danger of that is that you start out planning a holiday to surf in Hawaii and end up in Scotland in the middle of winter. Now, in terms of how I made that mistake myself, My master's thesis looked at the friendships of children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is a bit of a mouthful for this time of the morning, so ADHD. And I recall being very proud of my draft lit review that I sent off to my supervisor. I had what I thought was an excellent section summarising the literature on ADHD. That was followed up by, I thought, another really great section on friendships. I was then somewhat horrified when my supervisor put a red pen through the majority of it. Now, I was devastated at the time, as you can imagine, but looking back, it was a really important lesson for me to learn, and he was completely right to do that. My research question wasn't about ADHD in general, or about children's friendships in general. It was specifically on the friendships of children with ADHD. I totally lost sight of that, and my rewrite, I like to think, was much better, and it was much more focused on my research question, but I shudder now to think about all that time I wasted just because I'd lost sight of the question I was trying to answer. Now, I see the same thing now when I assist students with data analysis. So whether it's quantitative or qualitative data that they bring into me, they plonk it down in front of me on the desk and they say that they're overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. And so the first thing I ask them is, what's your research question? Now, it's hilarious because at that point they look at me with horrified looks on their faces because they realise that they've been so engrossed in collecting data, they've actually forgotten what their research question was. And that's why they're overwhelmed. That's clearly why they don't know where to start. So there's lots of benefits for keeping your research question in sight throughout the journey. It ensures you only collect the data that you absolutely need. It saves you getting sidetracked with fascinating but completely irrelevant details, and also helps you decide the focus of your analysis. I think one of the best pieces of advice I can give you as postgrad students is to print off a copy of your research question and keep it in plain sight the entire way through your research project, just so that you never forget it. I'm a lot more experienced now, but that's still a strategy I employ. Every new research project, the question gets printed off and it's right above my desk so I can't lose sight of it. That way I don't get sidetracked from the journey. Now, things I've learned, number 2, master yourself as well as your topic. So if research is a journey, postgraduate research is a journey in a strange land where you don't always know the language. Now, I really enjoyed both my postgraduate degrees, but I'm sure everyone here would agree with me that it can be stressful and perhaps a little bit challenging at times. I actually firmly believe that when you complete a research thesis, you learn more about yourself than you do about the topic that you're researching, particularly in relation to work habits and your ability to operate under huge time pressure. Now, as was mentioned, my PhD was in educational psychology. It looked at self-regulation in postgraduate students. Now, surprisingly, having reached the heights of postgraduate level study, most postgraduate students are incredibly bad at regulating themselves and their behaviour, and I can see smiles already. You know who you are. Now, another piece of advice I can give you is that if you want to complete your postgraduate research as quickly as possible, that's something you need to learn to get very good at. Now, self-regulated learning sounds complicated. It's a bit of a jargon term, obviously, but it's a very, very simple thing to wrap your head around. You set yourself a goal, you make plans as to how you're going to reach that goal, and then you monitor and evaluate your progress towards it. Now, most people are actually pretty good at setting goals and making plans. In fact, making plans that you never action is a really excellent way to procrastinate. What we aren't so good at is monitoring and evaluating our progress towards the goals that we make. Now, it's actually a really simple thing to do. Take a few minutes at the end of every day and reflect back. What did you do well? What didn't you do so well? And more importantly, why? So it's not just about feeling a failure because you haven't done the work you set yourself. It's about why didn't you actually achieve it. What could you do differently tomorrow? Or did you have a great day and you're just going to employ the exact same strategies again? Then once a week, take the chance to reflect back on your bigger goal. Any good journey needs to be completed step by step. So are you stepping in the right direction? How many more steps are there to take? Will you actually get there in time? They're all really, really important questions to be asking when you're going on a research journey. Now, if you're not stepping in the right direction, what can you do about it? Are you managing your time poorly? Are you letting stress affect your productivity? Is that pile of readings on your desk never moving? Are you having trouble getting through them? They're all actually things that you can learn to manage much, much better. So taking the time to learn that as you go will really, really pay off in the long run. Now, if you're not quite sure why you're not managing those things, well, you're on a journey in a strange land. It's actually okay to stop and ask directions if you need to. One of the main findings from my PhD research was that help-seeking behaviour actually increases academic achievement. So I know a lot of people perceive help-seeking as a sign of weakness. It's actually a very, very clever thing to do. Now, I have a simple example of where I engaged in self-regulation during my PhD. It became very apparent to me quite early on that I have definite tendencies towards procrastination. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one here in the room today who has tendencies in that area. It's actually a very, very normal behaviour to engage in. And once again, I can see the smiles around the room, so I'm clearly not the only one in that boat. Now, while it is perfectly normal, it actually isn't going to get your research completed. So it's the sort of thing you need to tackle quite early on. And that was something I realised early on in my PhD. Now, having identified that as an issue was just the first step. I had to find some way to fix it. And a really good way to solve issues like procrastination is to keep a time diary and have a look at what you should be doing each day and what you actually did do instead. With behaviours like procrastination, there's usually some sort of pattern going on there. There's something in particular that you're constantly doing instead of your work. Now, I can see nods this time, so you probably all know the types of things you do. Let's see if you're all awake out there. Let's have a quick show of hands. So, who surfs the internet instead of doing their work? Okay. Reading non-related books? Yep, okay. Playing computer games? Okay, not so many on that one. Interesting. What about housework? Excellent. Okay, well, I'm glad I'm in good company. For me, housework was the problem. And it's fascinating. I'm not really normally a clean freak at all. You know, I'm quite happily leave cleaning to someone else. But when I was doing my PhD, it seemed absolutely imperative that my house was spotless. It just had to be. Now, identifying that behaviour, as I say, is just the first step. And so I had to figure out a solution to it. And with something like housework, you actually can't leave your house a pitch while you're completing your thesis. Now, I found a very nice solution, which you will probably all be a little bit jealous about. My mum offered to come and do my housework once a week for me. Isn't that nice? And it was a great solution because she felt like she was contributing to my PhD, which was lovely, and it meant I had no excuses any longer. I had to get down and do my work. Now, other strategies that I learned along the way to deal with procrastination was knowing exactly what I wanted to do for any one block of time and being really specific about it. I remember when I was writing my master's thesis and I'd get up in the morning and say to myself, I'm going to work on my thesis today. I did everything but. I watched the daytime soaps, I watched the talk shows, I baked batches of muffins. My family were very well fed, if I recall. If I got up in the morning though and I said, okay, I'm going to read those 3 articles and then I'm going to write the participant section of my method, it would be done by 2 o'clock that day. And that was so much better because while I was engaging all those other activities, I felt terribly guilty the whole while. I knew I should have been doing something else. Whereas if it was done by 2 o'clock, I could bake a batch of muffins if I wanted to. Now, my other strategy was never leaving something at a really difficult stage. And I'm sure you know what I mean. You're reading a journal article, you can't quite wrap your head around it, and you think to yourself, oh, I must be tired, I'll leave it for tomorrow. You never come back to it, do you? I mean, where's the appeal? If it was difficult to start with, you've got no incentive to pick that task back up the following day. So if you have to leave a task midway, if you're a procrastinator like me, always leave it at either a really easy stage to pick back up again or a really interesting stage. It's going to make it much more enticing to start when you begin again. But enough about procrastination. I seem to be procrastinating over discussing the other things I've learned. But before I leave the subject of mastering yourself, there was one thing that I really wanted to make a point of. Something that I learned not just from my PhD, but also from running my own business, is that the one single thing you absolutely have to have is an unwavering belief in yourself and your ability to do the work. Without that, when things don't go to plan, and let's face it, things don't go to plan with research, without that belief in yourself and your ability, it's really, really hard to stay on track. So always believe in yourself. If you think about it in the context of being a journey, with any journey, people usually reach their destination. They might experience flight delays, lost luggage, perhaps annoying fellow passengers along the way, but they all eventually get there. And I think that's a really important thing for you to keep in mind as you travel through your postgrad research journey. You do eventually get there in the end. Now, things I've learned, number 3, technology is your best friend. It's always a good idea to pack wisely when you're going on a journey. If you're going on a postgraduate research journey, one of the most important things you can pack is a technology toolkit. Now, those of you who know me won't be surprised at all to hear that's one of my pieces of advice. I've built my whole company on the idea that technology for research saves you time and improves the quality of your outputs. So given that, it's actually quite funny to think back to how I tackled my master's thesis. I recall at the time, EndNote had just arrived on the scene. That probably gives you an indication as to roughly how old I am, actually. Now, I was terribly excited about the thought of EndNote, and I rushed out and I bought myself a copy immediately, and then jumped straight into trying to use it. Now, trying would be the operative word. I felt very much like that dog on my slide. I completely failed to take the time to learn how to use it properly. I just clunked around, it didn't work very well, and I assumed it was a fault with the software. It couldn't possibly be me. Surely, crappy technology wasn't working for me at all. Now, even then I failed to learn my lesson. I didn't stop, take the time to learn how to use it effectively, and because of that, I actually think that I probably would have been quicker doing my reference list manually. I spent so long trying to fix it up, it would have been better just scrapping it and doing it myself the good old-fashioned way. Now, for my master's, I also had no idea about styles or templates in Microsoft Word, so I manually created my table of contents. I was horrified when I realised you could do that automatically. I taught myself how to use SPSS and made some dreadful mistakes along the way. I didn't know about NVivo, so I analysed my qualitative data with highlighter pens. All things I did differently for my PhD. I definitely learnt my lesson, but I really am quite horrified looking back now as to how much time I lost by A, not finding out what technology was available, and B, failing to learn how to use it properly. Now, since then, I've been able to continue to learn how to use technology effectively for research, and I think my research is the better for it. I no longer use EndNote, but I'm a big fan of Zotero. I think it's an absolute whiz at capturing my reference information. The piles of paper that used to be stacked up on my desk are all nicely stored away and organised in Evernote, and I know I can always grab one single piece of information with a click of a few buttons. I'm a big fan of using Twitter for information gathering, And I love the fact that things just appear magically in my Twitter feed rather than me having to go out and manually hunt for them. With technology always evolving, there's always opportunities to learn more. So I suggest you talk to others, find out what the greatest and latest in technology is for your discipline, and learn how to use it effectively. I think you'll be surprised as to what you find out. Number 4, in terms of my things I've learned, research isn't a solitary venture. Back when I was a postgraduate student, I remember thinking that it was. I felt very isolated. No one was as interested in my topic as I was, and no one knew as much about my topic as I did. I remember my friends and family were supportive, but they didn't really understand why I wanted to be doing postgraduate research. When I went to social events, I actually remember lying about what I did for a living. It was easier to do that than have someone ask what my thesis was about and have to try and explain it to them, knowing that they'd get that glazed over expression when you start to explain it to someone else. Now, looking back, I can see I actually wasn't as isolated as I thought I was. For both my Masters and my PhD, I had the support of 2 incredible groups of fellow students. We enjoyed successes together, we vented our frustrations when we had to, and we celebrate our actual submissions when it finally came upon us. They helped me proofread, they delivered cooked meals to me when I was in the final throes of finishing, and they celebrated me when I finally did submit. Now, while I consider that I was really fortunate that I had them as part of my journey, it didn't happen by chance. So we knew that we were undertaking a difficult journey, and we actively sought each other out so that we had that network in place as we went through the research process. I think this morning's breakfast would be an excellent opportunity for you to network with your fellow students if you don't have such a network in place. The other reason I wasn't quite as isolated as I thought was that I had the support of my supervisors. Now, I'm not entirely sure that I saw them as allies at the time. They did wield the dreaded red pen. But now that I look back, I actually couldn't have done it without them. It's very easy to see your supervisor as the villain in the piece. They fail to respond to your emails immediately, they forget previous decisions made at meetings, they're late for your meetings sometimes, but they're actually just doing a really difficult job. Now, I think it's worth remembering that they're the ones that were interested enough in your topic to take you on as a student in the first place. They're probably also interested in you as a person, and they have a vested interest in you finishing. So we talked earlier about asking for directions along the way if you need to. I'd suggest making your supervisor your first port of call. Now, if you need further convincing that research is a team effort rather than a solitary experience, you only need to consider what the purpose of research actually is. A colleague of mine has a lovely metaphor about research being a tower of gold bricks, hence the picture on my slide. And the idea is that as a researcher looking at a particular topic, you come along and you put the first gold brick down for the tower. Over time, other researchers come along and they look at the gold brick and they put down a gold brick of their own. And over time, the tower obviously builds up. Now, sometimes people are putting a brick on the top of the tower, but other times the tower gets built with a bit of a gap and someone needs to put a brick in that particular gap to reinforce the tower so that it doesn't fall over. So I think it's important to keep in mind that purpose of research. You're a researcher building on the knowledge of other people, building the gold tower for your particular discipline. So research certainly isn't a solitary venture. Things I've learned, number 5, postgraduate research is the first journey of many. Postgrad research can take you all sorts of interesting places. Something that I failed to realise at the time that I was a student was the possible avenues it could open up. I think because our research topics themselves, by necessity, are quite narrow and specific, it's easy to think that what you do as a student isn't transferable to other real-world type settings. That's where you'd be wrong. Now, I very rarely have a need to draw on my knowledge of ADHD children's friendships or how to teach postgraduate students to be self-regulated. But my postgrad study equipped me with the skills that I needed to complete some incredible projects. The one that was the biggest leap from my educational psychology background involved the rebuilding of Christchurch's CBD after the earthquakes. Now, I have no skills whatsoever in town planning. I'm an educational psychologist. But post-earthquake, Christchurch City Council asked the residents of Christchurch to submit their ideas on how they thought the CBD should be redeveloped. Now, not surprisingly, they had a lot of ideas, 106,000 ideas, in fact. And those of you that are qualitative researchers here today, I can see a few of you out there, you'll know that's a significant amount of data to deal with. So it was very fortunate that thanks to my postgraduate study, I had skills in project management, I had skills in data analysis, and particularly of assistance on that project, I knew how to use the in vivo software really, really well. So without a doubt, that was the most challenging research project I've ever been involved in. I was horribly daunted at first, as you can probably imagine, but it wasn't very long before I realised I really did have the skills that I needed. We had a mix of different data types in that project. We had post-it notes, 14,000 post-it notes that people scribbled ideas on at an expo. We had Lego models that children had built. We had video clips, and then we had the more traditional sort of formal written submissions. Now, I'd never crossed paths with any of that type of data when I was doing my postgraduate study, but when it came down to it, it was still data. It needed to be analysed, and I absolutely knew how to do that. Now, client confidentiality prevents me talking about the specifics of some of the other amazing projects I've been involved in, but the skill set I learnt as a postgraduate student has enabled me to be involved in projects that have looked at improving the outcomes for victims of domestic violence, looking at the day-to-day needs and experiences of hospital patients, and looking at housing requirements of disadvantaged and low socioeconomic groups. Having the privilege of hearing the stories of those groups of people is something that's actually pretty special to me, and I can actually thank my postgraduate research study for that. In terms of it ending up interesting places, I've obviously taken a rather non-traditional path in terms of my research career. My company, Academic Consulting, is the only one of its kind here in New Zealand, and it's been really exciting building a business up from nothing. When I started as a newbie researcher back in 1997, I had no idea I would end up making a career out of it, never mind a business, but I fell in love with research as a student, and I haven't looked back since. Now, I started with a baby photo. I thought I'd finish with a graduation photo. As my title for today suggests, these are just some of the things that I've learned so far. I might be a few years older than when I started, but there's still time to learn more. And I'm really fortunate that my career as a researcher enables me to do just that. Having said that, I'm incredibly envious of those of you here today who are starting out as researchers. The opportunities and the possibilities are endless. I wish each and every one of you all the best for your postgraduate research and the journey that follows. Don't forget to keep your destination in mind, pack wisely, take it one step at a time, and ask for directions if you need to. Happy travels.
Now, Lyn very kindly said she would answer questions. So, who has a question that Lyn might be able to help with? Come on, this is a 3-minute test. This is a 1-minute test. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. I was just wondering, why did you decide to move from quantitative to qualitative research?
That's a very good question. The department that I did my postgrad study in was very quantitatively focused. So we covered qualitative a little bit as part of our research methods courses, but it wasn't something that I'd had particular exposure to. So I guess, that was what I saw all the other researchers doing in terms of the quantitative side of things, and yeah, that was just the path that I followed. I came across qualitative research. I was working as a research assistant when I was a master's student, and that happened to be a qualitative project. And back then, In Vivo wasn't around, but the predecessor to it, it had a really unfortunate name actually, was called Nudist. We used that on the project, and that was definitely where I fell in love with qualitative. It was the use of the software, the stories, the narratives that were there. So yeah, I guess I just needed that sort of exposure to the pleasures and enjoyment of qualitative research. It's certainly, I think a lot of people think qualitative is an easy option. If people don't like numbers, they think, I'll just do a qualitative, that's a piece of cake. It's actually really hard. I don't think I realised that when I was crunching numbers. It's a lot more time consuming. It can be a lot more challenging at times, but for me personally, it's a lot more enjoyable. I really love the stories that I hear from people with interviews and focus groups and so on. And yeah, I think it just really gives people a chance to express themselves. So sorry, that was a very long answer to that question, but that was why I went across from the other side, so to speak.
No, I think it was a quick. At what part of your journey were you able to step back and balance the actual research with the mechanics of getting it done?
Probably, that's a very good question. Probably quite far on in the piece, actually, because when you're a student, you are, as I said, you're journeying in a strange land. Everything's very new, and yeah, you do tend to get a little bit sort of focused on the day-to-day stuff. So I think for both my master's and my PhD, I just hit a point where I realised it actually had to be done. I lecture a master's level research methods paper, and I always say to my students, the only good thesis is a finished thesis. And I think when you hit that point, that's when you start to change into the sort of logistics and mechanics of actually getting it done. But yeah, it certainly was a little bit further on down the piece in both of my theses than I really would have liked. That's probably something I would have done differently looking back.
Okay, any more? Lyn, stay there.
Oh, okay.
And Carmen's going to help me. There's a whole lot of things we're going to give you. But Lyn, I just wanted to thank you. I think it is incredibly difficult to talk about yourself and at a breakfast meeting to provide personal insights and professional insights. And I think the students and supervisors in the room and the staff have been really entranced by your own story. I've learned, for example, to ring mum immediately. I'm going to get rid of the muffin trays. I'm going to put away the vacuum cleaner. But I did think your important messages about self-belief, about hanging on to the research question in particular, and the excitement of where the destination and the journey might take you, I think, have been really fascinating insights. So thank you so much for coming early this morning and giving us something of yourself and something of your professional life as well. So could I ask you to give Lyn a big round of applause? And Carmen, who we've just met at our table, is going to give Lyn a nice big bunch of flowers and a little present.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Oh, wow, they're beautiful. Lovely.
And this as well.
Oh,
thank you very much.